All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next session. My name is Gina. For those of you that are just joining, I'm the Partner Success Manager here at RevGenius, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Adam, Head of Revenue Operations at Pigment, and Mollie, VP of Operations at Sound. We'll be discussing the state of RevOps in 2025. Also, a huge shout out to Pigment for being our partner sponsor. Without them, this guys wouldn't be possible for you. So please give them a warm welcome, and I'm going to turn it over to Mollie now.
Awesome. Happy RevCon. Thanks for joining us on day 3. Adam and I are so thrilled to be here. Thinking about the session, State of RevOps 2025, can we believe it's almost 2025? I feel like it was just like 2010, like last year. So time flies. We're 3 months away. Really excited to dive into this. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mollie Bodensteiner. I lead not revenue operations, but operations, including revenue operations at Sound. And then I'm joined today with Adam. Adam, want to give a quick intro?
Hey everyone, my name is Adam Cespedes-Zaman. I'm head of RevOps at in North America at Pigment. Past lives, I worked for a few other New York-based B2B SaaS companies, most recently at Greenhouse Software, and before that at a company called Yext. For those who may be a little unfamiliar with Pigment, we're an integrated business planning platform used by teams such as finance, ops, people, comp teams from use cases ranging from headcount planning to territory quota modeling and even supply chain management.
Awesome. Before we dive in, use the chat, ask questions. We want to engage with the audience. We've got a great number of attendees in seat today. Let's learn from each other. Let's ask questions. Let's, pick each other's brains and continue to grow in the community. As we kick off, first thing we want to just really cover is what are the trends that we're anticipating going into 2025? And, Adam and I were prepping for this. And one of the big key things that we started to discuss was what is this evolution of the revenue operations professional and leader? So, Adam, as we think about, where RevOps has gone from the last, 5 years and the skill sets, what are going to be the new skill sets that are going to be expected for, leaders in revenue operations as well as just individual contributors?
It's a great question. And I think what we've seen, especially in the last 5 years, is RevOps has become a lot more technical, in the sense that when I first started in RevOps, and probably when you did too, the extent of how technical people were was really just like Salesforce admins and maybe Salesforce developers. Now we have data analysts and people are really proficient with different programming languages, able to set up pretty complex automations in tools such as Clay and other things like that. But more important, because everyone's kind of doing this, it's now up to us to become much better storytellers. So you have all the data, you have everything at your fingertips, but how are you actually going to communicate that? How, as a leader, are you going to convince your head of sales, your CRO, your CFO that what you're saying actually holds weight? And essentially just learn to present. Storytelling with data is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I laugh because, 5+ years ago, the role was can we get the data? And now that data is so much more accessible based on it, advances in, technology, AI, those components, we've got to actually know how to present it, know how to influence and drive those decisions from that. What advice would you have for somebody who's, sitting in this pivotal point of, I need to get better and stronger at being able to refine those skills, right? What are the opportunities or what are the learning paths they should consider?
You and I have both discussed this, and for the audience, Mollie and I have a pretty similar background in the sense that when I first started in RevOps, I wasn't very technical. I saw the way things were going and I started hiring people who knew how to do things that I just wasn't even able to understand. So 4 years ago, I took the measured decision, I put myself back through school, ended up doing a master's in applied analytics. And the main rationale behind this was, as I'm building teams, I want to be able to help my team and even just understand the very core things that we're working on. And so just having a more technical background is going to help a ton hiring teams, but even just understanding a lot of the tools that we're utilizing right now. So Mollie, maybe you can share your story as well of your similar path.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a more technical background in nature and have done, the Salesforce development and those aspects of things. And, I've continued to teach myself Python so I can work through models and understand, how to quickly execute on what I need to be able to execute on. One of the things that I've really now been working through is, and this is one of the pieces I think the expectations of RevOps is changing is, we've fought so long to get a seat at the table, right? So like you think everything was like, how do you get a bigger voice? How do you become that thought partner? Like, how do you get that seat at the table? Like, we've now earned the seat at the table, and now it's up to us of like, how do we level ourselves up to continue to have that seat, by being that thought partner, being that strategic leader, being that growth driver to the organization. And so one of the things that I've continued to challenge myself with is, how do I get more well-rounded business acumen? How do I spend more time in FP&A and understand, more of the planning process there? As I've continued to work with companies that are fundraising, how do I start to get more of the financial modeling in place that helps me not only look at kind of revenue metrics, but also financial metrics, and understand how to blend those together in my decision making. So, not to say the opposite of Adam, but kind of, he went more technical. I've gone to the other side of like the strategy and planning piece of things.
We're exact opposites, because I have like a more finance background, and I think if we were to summarize like two quick takeaways from this one, it would be having a more technical background is going to help always. But I actually really agree with your point. I think RevOps now has a much bigger seat at the table when it comes to headcount planning, financial planning, um, capacity planning, all this kind of stuff. And for a lot of people who might have only started in like a sales ops or CS ops type role, or maybe even in a data analyst, they're not as familiar with reading a P&L or understanding a balance sheet. And this, I found myself working a lot closer with like our FP&A and finance teams, and we partner on a lot more. Whereas previously, I think certain like annual planning exercises are really top down, and finance would kind of give a number and be like, hey, we need to go hire 5 people here and 10 people there. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, let me make the territories. Now it's a lot more, it's a much more partnered approach. They might have the top line number, and then we're going to come with a bottoms up approach and be like, hey, I actually think if we need to hit X million in revenue for next year, instead of hiring 5 people here and 5 people there, let's do 2 here and 8 there based on X, Y, and Z.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think as we talk about the evolution of the RevOps professional, right? You're not just the business partner to the CRO, right? You're the business partner to the CFO, the COO, the CPO, right? If you're doing more usage based and, product focused growth, as well as the CEO. Anthony had a great question about, what about marketing ops going into RevOps? I'm a great case study for that, right? My background is marketing ops. I worked for Marketo. I, come from the traditional marketing ops piece. I think Andy Moat has a great LinkedIn post on like why marketing ops professionals make the best RevOps professionals, and like shameless plug, I wholeheartedly agree. I think when you think about that transition of like marketing ops going into RevOps, generally marketing ops are more technical in nature. They are managing a lot broader set of tools to not only, the first party tools like the marketing automation, but also understanding the ad platforms, content, web. There's a lot of diversity around that. They're also generally full funnel too. So when you think about the holistic part of like marketing tends to be from, top of funnel all the way down to customers when you're doing it right through the bow tie there. And when you think about the budgetary piece of it, you've got ad spend, you've got, campaigns, you've got events, you've got trade shows. Like they tend to have a little bit more of that financial ROI analysis than a traditional, I'd say, sales ops role too. Anything you want to add on that, Adam?
I completely agree. We have marketing ops sitting under our RevOps umbrella here. In previous companies, it wasn't as such, and that posed a couple challenges because they're so interconnected, especially at the top of the funnel. So just from like a systematic perspective, like that was tough to do. But I agree to your point. I don't have a marketing ops background, but the marketing ops individuals on our team are typically some of the more technical people. And I feel like in most companies now, there's such a focus on the top of the funnel and pipeline, and they're so critical just to understand, like, how are you scoring certain engagements? Like, are we making sure that your marketing platform ties to your CRM correctly? Like, there's so many points at which things can go wrong that they're very, very detail-oriented professionals. And I've seen a lot of people pivot really well from a marketing ops role into a RevOps or CS ops or different types of roles, and vice versa as well. So to anyone else out there, like, if your marketing ops team is sitting elsewhere, try and get it under RevOps. I feel strongly
Centralize that.
Centralize it, yeah.
We had another question just on like a BDR transition to sales ops, RevOps. Any experience with that?
Yeah, I think a BDR role and BDR SDR roles are critical, and you learn so much from the ground up as far as like how a sales motion works. So typically I've seen this happen where a BDR SDR will move into more of like a junior analyst role in a sales ops capacity, because that's the area that they're most familiar with. In that kind of role, you start learning more about the larger macro things. I think in just general sales roles, sometimes you're very focused on hitting your number. You're not always aware of everything else that's going on around. But I think it's an easier step to do, especially if you're top performer at the company. What I'd advise you to do is, even in your BDR role, try and be creative. Like, take a demo with a tool that you might be like a BDR productivity tool. Take this to your leader. Take this to your RevOps. Like, hey, I have this tool. I think it could really help our team. Like, show the initiative, and these are the types of things which will lend well into like shifting into a more operational type role or scope.
Absolutely. One of the things, and I've hired BDR SDRs into revenue operations roles, generally starting in more of like the analyst phase of this. The one thing that I always push on in this is like, what are your intentions, right? And some of this is, and as I've hired AEs and CS people, right, over to this function is, and I'm going to say this and everyone maybe will laugh or roll their eyes, like, it's not the easy role, right? Like, RevOps isn't easy. I think a lot of the perception that people see is like, we're doing these great things and it's like super fun, right? Like there's a lot of work that goes into it. So don't assume it's like the easy path, and from that perspective, right? And it's like, oh, this is going to get me out of kind of this prospecting role, and I'm going to go and just like do these fun things. There's a lot that goes into it, and it's a steep learning curve too, right? So there's tons of value for me, especially in hiring somebody who understands the business and then being able to coach them on more of like the process and the systems and like the components there. But you've got to have the right intentions of why you want to make that leap.
Yeah. And one thing to add to that is, I really think, depending on who RevOps reports up to, whether that's a CRO, a CFO, a chief operating officer, the main business partners that you work with, for example, in my role, it's going to be our CRO and our head of sales for the US. Understanding their view of RevOps is critical, especially if you're at like maybe a career juncture and you're looking at moving into a new role. This is something I'm always very, very careful at vetting. Is I want to understand, hey, what does the CRO think of RevOps? I've taken some interviews previously where they've been like, oh yeah, like I really need my reporting to be great and I need to have all my KPIs at hand. I'm like, okay, great, you can find someone for that. That's not exactly what I want to do. I think the modern CRO and the modern head of sales, they really look at RevOps as a strategic partner to them. In our one-on-ones, we're discussing like the strategy of the business, like where should we potentially increase investment, decrease investment, what things are going well, versus just like, oh, hey, Adam, can you go pull this report? It's like, no, we have enough tools like this. So as a baseline, I think you should have that easily accessible, and then try and make yourself a more strategic business partner, and go to them with problems, but solutions as well. You've seen X, but you're going to propose Y. Don't go and say like, hey, this is going wrong, and then don't propose a solution. That's the quickest way to lose someone's trust, honestly.
Absolutely. And I've led RevOps at five different organizations, and I think you're spot on this. Is like every organization's revenue operations or go-to-market operations or whatever label we're putting on it, at the end of the day, like, are going to be slightly different based on what the business needs and like the expectations of, you know, where they're at in their growth model, what they're doing from a product or global expansion, et cetera. So really important to be vetting that and understanding that and knowing like there will be the evolution. And if you're doing the maturity curve right, you know, to some extent, sometimes the expectation is like, we can't pull this report and like we need to get those foundational pieces in place to be able to support those. I know, Adam, you've probably been in those situations too, where you go in and you're like, man, I don't even know what the customer count is because we don't have these foundational pieces in place. But it's, you know, our roles to continue to elevate and, you know, move through that model to have those right foundations. And I love, you know, love what you said on like, you've got to be that business partner and we've got to be able to influence, right? And, you know, one of my biggest pieces of advice is make them think it's their idea. You will get things done so much faster when you have buy-in that is not forced, right? And so, you know, it's the carrot and the stick, right? But really, when you can present somebody with like options and like being very compelling and, you know, and pragmatic and like guiding them through the decision, if it's their decision that they make, they're going to have ownership of it. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things as like revenue ops professionals, like we've got to figure out is like, how do you transition ownership? Because while we are the creators of these processes and like the implementers of this tech, like if we can't drive transition of ownership, we continue to own. And that's where I think we hinder adoption, we hinder growth, and we also hurt our capacity for innovation.
Completely agree. And I see a really interesting comment from Arsh in the chat, which is liking the approach, but still kind of getting defaulted to being more of an admin. Don't get me wrong. All ops teams need to have the baseline set up correctly. So we have a team of marketing ops individuals, marketing ops admins, as well as Salesforce admins who do a great job at just keeping up the level of all our systems and our data integrity and ensuring that we're not being asked and bombarded with a lot of questions like, hey, this is broken, hey, this is wrong. This is supplemented as well with, we actually have a couple of data analysts and we just hired a data engineer on our team. I think probably everyone in the chat and in the session can attest to having so much more data these days compared to 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And it gets really messy unless you set it up in the right structure. So this is going on a little tangent, but what we do here at Pigment, which is great, and the first time I've seen it, is instead of using Salesforce as our like central hub for everything coming in from Gong, from outreach, etc., we actually pipe everything into our data warehouse. We do all the transformation and cleaning there, and then we pipe it back into Salesforce just for the critical data that we need. And then the rest goes into Pigment. Like we use Pigment internally, and that's where all of our reporting, T&Q, ICM stuff is actually done. So long story short, in a whole RevOps team, you definitely need to have these technical individuals after you have a good baseline and to kind of like set the boundaries so like your data isn't going to go out of whack. I feel like only then can you really start focusing and trying to become more strategic and getting yourself a little bit more out of the weeds.
And let's be honest, even as a leader of a RevOps organization, do you still do admin work from time to time?
Oh, yeah. All the time.
All the time.
Yeah, this isn't all just glamour. I mean, in my role, I was the first RevOps person hired in North America, so I've been doing a bit of marketing ops, a bit of Salesforce admin, a bit of data, like everything. So don't get me wrong, I do it. This is still like the vision and the overall direction that I'm taking my team and we're moving towards as a company. But you're never going to escape you're never going to escape the clutches of Salesforce and your technical things.
Absolutely. We've got a good question from Peter too. So do you see RevOps either influencing or owning work/project management processes? Example, you know, adopting agile ways of working so that key functions they typically support, marketing, sales, etc., are going about their work in a similar way. Be curious what you guys are doing at Pigment in terms of like just intake management and planning.
That is a really, really good question and something that's very top of mind. So at the top level, we set quarterly OKRs. This is going to be at the company level. And then from the company level, every team, so RevOps, maybe your growth team or BD team, are going to define maybe 2 or 3 things that the whole org is going to work towards that tackles one of like the company level OKRs. Based on this is kind of how we set our prioritization. So we use a ticketing system for everything. For Salesforce specific thing, we actually keep that in Salesforce and just in cases, which keeps it really clean. And then for anything else, that might be ad hoc reporting requests or I don't know, just kick off another project that comes into our intake board. And it gets essentially like a P0, priority 0, if it is related directly to an OKR. If it's something that's directly revenue related or it's something broken with our data, that gets like a P1 or P2. And then everything else we kind of put in a P3, and we evaluate this every week. We have a team meeting and we're like, hey, okay, we've got XYZ on our plates. I think I can take 1 or 2 more things. And then we're going to prioritize it as such. The most important thing here, I think, is just communicating to your stakeholders. We get a ton of requests, and we are not shy to say like, hey, we just don't have the bandwidth to do this right now. We publish, we kind of like publish our the main things we're working on, so people understand we're not just saying no. It's not a black box. We're working on XYZ. So like your request isn't really, it's more of a nice to have, and this is going to get pushed out a little bit more. The whole company and like other teams, finance, et cetera, kind of use a similar framework. So it really helps just keep everyone aligned and kind of moving in the same direction as far as like how as a company we're prioritizing things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we take a similar approach too. I've tried to do like very formal sprint planning across my revenue operations teams and I've never been successful at it. I'd be really curious, and I'd love to talk to somebody who has been. I think it's, we have a level of rigor in terms of like the prioritization, but getting to the formality of, pointing and truly going through that methodology, just, part of it's not having enough capacity on the planning side to be as rigorous. And I think you nailed probably like the biggest thing that I found between success and failure, which is the communication back to the business around the prioritization and like the expectations around that. And the less they feel in the dark or like where their request falls, right? Like the worst case scenario is like, and I've been guilty of this, it feels like a black box, right? We ask for something and then it goes to the abyss and we never hear about it again, right? So the more you can keep things visible, top of mind, front and center, as well as explain why something's not as high of a priority. Generally, I've found that stakeholders are logical and reasonable. So when I've ran, my weekly business reviews with the different C-suite, it's here's what's on deck, here's the priorities, here's what we have capacity to do. If marketing thinks they've got a P0 and sales thinks they've got a P0 and I can only take 1, they need to come together and we all need to decide what is the P0 together. And again, make them own their decisions in the right way and help to influence those.
That's critical. I had one other example, which just skipped my mind, so I'll let you continue.
It'll come back. We've got a couple, a follow-up question on like the SDR to the sales ops role. And I think this is, one of the things that, we talked about in our prep too, right? Like as we're looking not only at like the RevOps leadership level, but just the organization shifts, like it's a lot harder to justify hiring new headcount, right? So with the rise of automation and AI and, looking at consolidation of spend in those pieces, like what are some of, the skill sets you're going to, look for in hiring? Like, how would you recommend somebody who has no experience in operations start to transition into these roles?
I still think the very, very, very baseline is being very, very proficient in Excel. And Excel or Google Sheets. Like, as an example, in the test that I give candidates who apply for my roles, one part of it is going to be like a technical test. So get a big data set, whether it's sales data or renewal data, and typically ask a couple questions. And these are things that you should be able to like manipulate and figure out and pick out the insights from here and there. So I think that's just the baseline, and kind of like where we started this conversation is it's going to be presenting and being able to convince who you're presenting to that what you're saying is correct, and they are willing to change course to do that. Again, just quickly going back to like the test that I set, it's a pretty short Excel test. People will pull out a couple numbers, but what I always get, or what I always ask for them, is they're going to be presenting this to the head of sales that they're going to be supporting. So there are some people who do really, really well and get all the data and everything and put in a nice deck together, but then they just aren't able to communicate what they've been able to do to the people that they need to convince. And that's a gap. I think that would be like the baseline. I'm curious to what you think, Mollie.
Yeah, I laugh because it's like the analysis paralysis, right? You get the data sets and it's like, I can put 50 different charts together from it, but like, what are the meaningful takeaways that you want people to walk away from? And, you know, it's that audience recognition, right? The way the CRO versus the VP of sales versus the sales director to the manager to the front line all need a slightly different cut of the same data in order for them to properly action. So I think, yeah, I mean, basic understanding of like being able to work through a data, right? So the pivot table, like VLOOKUPs, pivot tables, like or statements, you know, SQL, being able to write SQL, or at least understand a SQL query is really important as you think about the larger data sets. I think for me, I look at, you know, of the soft skills, like the coachable, the teachable, like the eager to learn, right? Like this is not a role that you're going to go into and like do the same thing. And like, it's an evolutionary role. Like more tech is going to come out, more things are going to come out. So like, how hungry are you to learn and grow? Whether that means you're going and taking a Salesforce certification, you're doing HubSpot certifications, like you have to be a continuous student in this space. And like those to me is like, if you have that eagerness to continue to evolve and grow, whether that's going deeper or that's going wider in a competency, I think is critical. And this is a great question for you, Adam, is like in the age of AI, like, would you still value a master's or bachelor's in applied analytics, or would you recommend somebody go learn AI? Like,
I think
no regrets.
No. You know, like some of that's a really good question. I do think AI gets people overestimate how good AI is, and still having the understanding or more of like a technical background to be able to like decipher things and kind of like look behind the like peek under the crack essentially is still critical. Look, in the roles that I hire, do I put more weight on someone who has like a master's or bachelor's or in any like statistical or like hard field? Not really, especially if you've got the experience, because people come from all sorts of backgrounds. This is very much just a personal choice, which I'm happy with. Like I'm not telling everyone to go and get a master's in applied analytics. You don't really need it, but it can be helpful.
And I see that Gina came on stage. This was such a great conversation. Love the audience engagement. We, you know, I feel like we got through one of our several trends. But this, you know, I think is so super pivotal as we think about the skills needed going into 2025. So thanks everyone for joining. I know Gina's going to tell me to shut up now, but connect on LinkedIn. Like we love to chat.
Absolutely, guys. So thank you so much, Adam and Mollie. Thank you again to our amazing platinum sponsor, Pigment. Again, without them, you guys wouldn't be watching this. So we're going to head on over to our next session. OpenAI or Emma from OpenAI and Kyle Coleman from Copy. So we will see you guys over there. Thank you again, Mollie and Adam.